there anything on our EU agenda, David? Or
yeah, I mean, one of the things that Jim brought up that I found really exciting is this. Speaking of heresies, etc., but is the Giordano Bruno.
Bruno, so he was an early astronomer.
Yeah, but it's like there's quite an interesting history. Yeah, I knew how the show with him ended, but I didn't really know very much about like any of his history, etc.
Welcome to the June 26th edition of the Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we have David, Jim, Richard, Buddy, Heather, and Robert. We are discussing the Celestical Heretic Giordano Bruno, the effects of the Carrington Event or EMP on our civilization, and what types of technology the ancients might have known. Please take a moment to like and subscribe.
Well, actually, it was, what Juan's topic is, this whole infinite universe, infinite in size, scale, and duration. That led me to, when I was searching on that, it led me to his work, Giordano Bruno. And he was pushing that whole idea back then. Obviously, an infinite universe where there's other worlds with life on them, just like there is here. But that whole thing with the packed spheres that's where he got the idea that it wasn't just infinite in size and duration, but that it had to be infinite in scale too, because you would have these spaces where you couldn't fit equal size spheres. His wording is a little more, you have to kind of wade through it to see what he's arguing, but the whole idea is that in the space between these spheres, you could either have a total vacuum, and he was against that idea, but if you're going to fill it, then you have to have different type of matter, which is smaller scale spheres, and that's where his argument went. But it's the part that was interesting to me is that all these topics that we're talking about now were already he was pushing arguments for and against them way back in the day, and then that all got swept away with him,
And it led to his little time on the barbecue, right? Ultimately,
right.
Yeah.
What happened to him?
Burn him at the stake.
They did?
Yeah.
Wow, he must have said some cool heresy stuff.
He's talking about spheres. Spheres.
How dare he?
Well, just saying that the universe was infinitely old would have been enough to get rid of them. But then saying that if there's other stars out there with planets and life like ours, that's back in the day.
Yeah. It was.
That was pretty radical. But that's how he saw it. He knew that the sun, not the Earth, but the sun was the center of our solar system, and other stars were like our sun, and therefore they should logically have planets like ours, and that's where he was going back in those days already.
Yeah,
I love
before Galileo.
Right.
Yeah,
I really do love the drawing here.
I've been diving. You should see some of the original like prints, woodcuts of the alchemical stuff that was happening back then. This is like mid to late 1500s. They're just really compelling. So, particularly when you're a little into geometry.
Well, what I meant is that if you scroll up slightly back to where you were, bugger.
Yeah.
You left.
I didn't know you were going there.
Oh, I'm totally going. No.
You think I could read your mind or something?
Look, my fingers are pointing. You should be able to understand what I'm saying.
Sorry, I'm looking the other direction.
Of course. No, but I like how they basically have the rings of the planet. The fact that it's very, in the Greek sense, it's the Earth-centric model, and in one of them over there. And I assume that these are symbols, like you can see a comet there and a few other things. And he's basically laying it out, mother, father, and whatever, he's putting it together there. But it still has that same he was like, he knew his audience. He was like, you got to look at it the same way. If you change it too much, they might lose you. So you got to keep it in the same pattern, And this one over here has the tree in it, which I thought was very nice, with the tree of life, so to speak, of the northern pole or southern pole or whatever the heck it was, the Norse tree, And of course, apparently someone entwining the tree or having sex with it. I can't figure it out. But yeah, it's just very interesting that these patterns are still they were, how many years removed, but still poignant or still referenced.
I mean, it's wild that you start looking at it as like a holographic reference or the as above, so below. This is what they're pointing at.
Yes.
That's what he was pointing at. And it's pretty profound, ultimately. And then you start seeing it come up again as they, I've seen in the mainstream, I've seen them say this about the great work they're doing at CERN, of course, right? But
when you just said the great work, I just freaked out there. I just went, look, it is the great work by the great architect.
The great work. The great work is a classic. It's a classic line out of Philosopher's Stone, etc.
Exactly.
But they're using these terms for CERN.
Oh, that's intentional. That's not you.
Of course. No, I know.
Okay. Yeah. I was actually just thinking that you slid that in there accidentally. No, you're actually intentionally telling me that's what they're actually saying. I'm intentionally saying that, yes. That's even more disturbing. Yeah. Thank you for scaring me.
But yeah, well, look at some of the stuff they're coming up with. And they're bringing this whole thing out with, the looking at this behavior is bringing all this ancient knowledge back into quantum. We see the patterns were actually, from like a Kabbalistic. They're making Kabbalistic references out of CERN. So.
Well, can we talk about a little bit? Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering if we get exactly that, like that consciousness, drawing in the consciousness. That Giordano Bruno was using thought experiments much in the same way that Einstein was using thought experiments, where they would kind of just meditate and draw them. And it's amazing that the conclusions were so similar. So, like, how does this level of consciousness affect what's going on with CERN? Is it similar in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're dealing with consciousness. They're talking about consciousness. Look at some of the symbols that they've placed around the thing. Let me see if I can dig them up.
Yeah, it's like Shiva and all this stuff. But if they're coming to the same patterns and the same pattern recognition, it's like it begs the question: are they how did all these people channel all these same things, get to these same points? And like the Hermetic principles we were talking about, and like those were channeled, and like all these things that people come up with that they don't know where they come from, but then we really can't, like they ring so hard, they're so applicable, you gotta question, what is that they're tapping into? Is it the same thing? Mm-hmm. Is it like a universal consciousness? Is it like a, I don't want to say a communal consciousness, because nobody was thinking that in Giordano Bruno's day. I don't know. That's what I was wondering.
Do you think? I mean, can you make the statement one more time that they weren't thinking? I'm not sure what you're referring to. How we're thinking, or?
Yeah, no. People, the mass culture at the time was not looking at it that way, which is why he was heretic. And so it
was the church. The church was just super dominant. Right. They were the end all authority, tyrannically. Right?
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, is like if all of us right now, or during Einstein's age or any of that time, if you're looking at like they were doing these thought experiments and they were collecting into the communal consciousness, which everyone at that time was thinking of, everyone at this time is thinking of. Back in the 1500s, what was he like? What was the collective consciousness, or what level was it that was bringing him this information? I mean, it's not a question we could really answer, but just an interesting thought.
Yeah. I mean, he was so strong on it that he went the whole way, and it's just like he just kept on, pushing it. and this is why he ultimately met his end, you know.
Right, but he was really protected for a while. He carried this thought around, got exiled from many countries, and then finally, when they didn't know what to do with him anymore because they'd kicked him out of all the countries already, they're like, all right, dude, we're going to have to burn you at the stake. You know that, right? We tried everything. Like, not everybody got the leeway to walk around like this guy was, like, something special about him. He was protected.
Yeah. I mean, he certainly, you know, was rubbing elbows with the best, you know, for sure.
All because he was thinker.
Right. Going against the mainstream, ultimately.
I love how we think that we would totally accept, like, if we were just thrown back in time, how we could solve all these problems. And we would realize very quickly that, no, they'd kill us. You know, like, they would not
for sure
tolerate that shit at all. I mean,
nope.
the stories of, well, Robert, your
stories
they'll do
it
the
today.
LDS.
They'll do it today.
Well, that's
they'll
what
do
I'm
it
just
today.
saying.
Right.
You know, they if you question certain things, they'll, and for no reason almost, it seems. I mean, and that's, I got to give credit for the, you know, like, only recently, and you're right, Heather, only recently have we started doing this introspection thing, and that's mostly after Freud, so mostly after 1880s, 1900, that we were actually having this introspection. If you go all the way back down to Rome, the words of the people in, like, Rome, they were incredibly selfish, always, they would hire people, like, they would think that they would hire mourners for their wedding or for their funerals and stuff, and everything was about image, how things looked, not how things were. And that's almost a different mindset, completely different mindset than when we were, even the mindset before, which I think was probably more, you know, respectful of the gods, so to speak.
Well, no, I mean, come on. I mean, there might not have been very many Marcus Aurelius, but there were some, and that's just such a generalization. It sounds like somebody has some theory about cognitive development they're trying to fit data into. I mean, look at even the Greeks and the Plato and Socrates. The people weren't that different.
Were amazing. Yeah,
people weren't that different then.
Right.
I think that they were. I think I think actually things are probably very similar in many ways, but the average man was only using, just like through the Middle Ages, they were illiterate and they were hearing things. That's a biased prejudice.
No, it very definitely is. It's like
I'm sorry. It's what I think.
People were like, if anything, more literature aware, even though they're illiterate. Like, for instance, when Thomas Paine came out with Common Sense, they would read it on street corners, to what you would call the illiterate masses, and they were eating it up. And it was just because it was in such common language. Well, I actually started reading Common Sense. It's these big, long, complicated sentences and 3-syllable words and concepts of the rights of kings and all. I mean, there's just too many stereotypes.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you go back, if you go back further, into like the early hundreds, say, you think about the different. There were many different types of religious groups, and even in if you go up into the upper regions of Europe or mid Europe, these were all people who were very tied to nature, and for some reason there was a huge imperative by the Catholic Church to destroy all these alternate views. And why would that be if they were just dumb idiots?
I'm not saying they were dumb idiots. That's not remotely what I'm referring to.
Okay. Well, what do you mean by literate? Literate means, to me, you're riding a train track. Then, if you're not quote unquote, this whole idea of diversity is, to me, is a joke, because it's like the antithesis of diversity, that I see particularly in the universities today. It's a railroad track.
I'm also not even remotely thinking about that either. We're certainly not at the top of our game on this, on some of the things that you've mentioned. Few of us are, like Sheldrake and others, but we're not there. I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I'm glad that these conversations can happen. And what I meant is that, and to be perfectly honest, I guess what I was referring to was the authority in that case, because these were rich people that I'm talking about in Rome. And I'm sure that there is a Marcus Aurelius, and there was Plato and all that stuff. But then there would be, let's just say, the upper class, for lack of a better term, in these cultures had ideas, maybe faux ideas. I don't know if I can think of it that way, that they weren't. People like, it's different than when you go to just the nobility from the royalty and their advisors, like, say, John Dee and stuff. Obviously Francis Bacon, these people were thinking, but then I'm not saying that the people were stupid because they were illiterate. I meant that they were not necessarily versed in all of this stuff, and some of them were put down very harshly for thinking outside of certain boxes. And that sort of mentality can also be seen just a few years ago in the 1950s, where I wouldn't be allowed to think certain ways. Neither would you. There's certain things you just weren't allowed to touch on. I think that's probably
things you
universal.
can't touch on right now. Today.
Exactly. This is what I'm saying. But there's a. I guess what I was trying to say is that things perhaps maybe. This was my understanding of the way that Roman society worked. But you know what? I'm willing to listen to different interpretations.
One of the soft colorations that is used, and I'm absolutely guilty of doing this, particularly in my past. But it's like, oh, that's primitive. It's a primitive idea, and et cetera. And it's like, this is a disparaging, kind of term. And it's like, but you're basically just discounting like a perspective. And you just say, well, it's primitive compared to me, of course, and this is to me, this is a blinding that happens to us.
I wasn't referring to all of them. I'm just simply referring to the way that a lot of them were obsessed with that. Just written down in their works. And I'm not trying to obviously, we're not talking about Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle having an argument.
No, I'm talking about, like, there were a lot of different. Just look at the quote unquote pagan. They put it all on one barrel. There's an immense differentiation in these beliefs, and ultimately much more pacifistic. One could argue easily.
Well, they also had to deal with nature a lot more. We're talking about. I guess you could say at the time, one of the most advanced empires of the world, and we could say the exact same thing about, Hollywood, in the same way we're talking about that, how they're obsessed with image. That's just a product of environment. I didn't really necessarily mean to insult them.
That's propaganda. It's a way of control. It's mind control.
What?
Hollywood is clearly.
Okay, Hollywood. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I was like,
that's what you're referring to.
I thought you were talking about I'm not trying to mind control anyone. What the hell are you talking about?
No. No, here's
but I can
your
see
culture.
The same type of thing.
It's here. We'll serve your culture up on a platter, so you don't have to make it yourself.
Well, I assume that is similar to how Rome had to have some aspects of that, because they could be divorced from reality a lot more, since they had for the first time they had this.
They had present circuses.
Yeah, exactly. They had distractions.
Well,
they
had theaters, In the different cities, they'd have theaters and coliseums,
mm-hmm.
and in the theaters, they'd have performances that went around, just like Hollywood, sort of. Informing you about the imperial viewpoint, or what you need to believe, or what should be important to you.
It's just
very much like Hollywood.
Well, that's all. I wasn't like I said. You don't want to. Although admittedly, there's some amazing stuff that we think that Rome was the pinnacle of, and we tend to find out later after we're doing some research, especially North Africa, how they weren't. There's Colosseums way bigger than the Colosseum in Rome. In say, just across the river or across the Mediterranean, like 250,000 people Colosseums and stuff. Some crazy stuff that it just makes me question a whole whack of things suddenly. What kind of world did they actually live in? And obviously they had some pretty, for lack of a better term, I use the word liberal places. Like, for example, Carthage was apparently a conglomeration of different religions and faiths. And were basically free, and they were not necessarily Saturnian focused in the Roman-esque way. They were inviting refugees from all over. They were sort of like a melting pot, from my understanding. Now I'm all questioning myself. Now I don't want to be I'm all worried because everyone jumped at me because I know it's a generalization.
Well, no, actually, we haven't. The thing is, we've been bringing in different things, but you keep thinking we're arguing with you, but we're not.
I don't think you're arguing.
We're sharing observations.
Yeah. We love you.
Okay. It's okay.
And now Carthage, since you brought it up, Carthage was really, there was this trading culture in the Mediterranean based on ships, from way predating Rome.
Oh,
and associated with Tyre. I forget the name of what they called these people. And Carthage was sort of a Western outpost, or maybe even the biggest center of that. So it was very trading oriented. And when you have that kind of thing with lots of ships going around, you get mixture of cultures. Just like you end up with, there's Irish people in Newfoundland, and we showed some films of them, and people could recognize which town in Ireland they came from by their accent,
Oh,
and so
yeah.
you get that mixing in a way that you don't so much with a land-based thing like Rome, So what you say about the more cultural diversity makes sense.
Well, it was just weird that Rome had these, I guess you could say, religious tantrums, for lack of a better term. I don't know.
Well, it was a philosophical thing. Carthage was. Look at their locations, right? Rome was on the rise. They had a very kind of republican, not our current republican, but the Senate and the structure, and then the ideals, right? Of like the kind of a mythic view of things for them, right? And Carthage was mercantile, it was basically growing because of trade, and they were growing simultaneously. So they polarized ultimately, and I think that was the foundation of the battle. And it's a classic battle. I'm sure you've heard the stories with Hannibal, et cetera,
the man had a good fucking plan.
But this was the big. Sicily was the big, center point, of the whole thing. And Scipio ultimately was the guy who came in at the end, and
Syracuse was the last holdout of the Greek Empire.
Okay.
That's where Archimedes lived.
Right.
That's where he arguably invented the first computer, and where he invented, the giant crystals or mirrors that he could reflect and start lighting ships on fire as they approached, as long as it was daytime, of course. And what was the other one? He had grapples that if your ship came up to this place, they could basically hit a button. I know it sounds weird, and it would come up and it would claw the bottom of the ship and then pull downwards and pull the ship underwater.
Wow.
Yeah. These are their defenses. That's why they thought they could take the Roman Empire, and they could not.
They took him out. They took him out pretty non ceremoniously.
Well, they pardoned him he was pardoned by the general, but according to the records, a soldier saw a old man drawing in the sand with a stick, and when he wouldn't respond to orders, he shoved a sword through him.
Okay.
So that's probably how he ended right there.
Yeah.
So sad as it was.
Yep. Yeah.
And that guy, he invented the bathtub. No, I'm just kidding. But but to think about what they would have done. I mean, the story later, of course, is that object that he took, the 2,000-year-old computer, was taken by the general and it was in his house for 200 or 300 years. His family had it, where they would, there's a few records of it being shown to people who came to visit. He goes, and
well, what would it do?
It would predict
Celestial,
all the motions of all the planets, and it would also predict all of the eclipses, whether or not they be, and what hemisphere they'd be in, and so on.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a big deal. It was, and there's
it's like a really automated astrolabe.
No. It was crazy.
No, it's me. It's like a sophisticated clock with all kinds of gears and
yes,
right, the right.
But it was
number.
a literal computer, though, because in the sense that it would store data and it would compute. So it was definitely a
gearbox.
And it was about the size of a laptop, too.
It's a gearbox.
There's a picture right there. Yeah. No, it's
a really, really sophisticated gearbox.
Right. It's not a computer in any sense that would be meaningful. It can only do one thing.
Well, yes, but that's what computers could only
and all
do
the
before.
answers. All the answers you can get.
By the way, Neil, we might have a little bit more experience on this one.
Oh yes, I'm sure you guys built with Greek technology. You're
Just
not that
bit.
old. But no, in the sense that a computer must calculate and store data. In that sense, it's not just a calculator; it's a computer. So in that sense,
no, it's not. It's not even a calculator. It's not even a calculator. See, a calculator or a computer is something you can give it a problem. Here's a problem I have. Can you give me the answer? You can't do that with this. It has one thing that it does, and it cranks out the cycle of these events over time, and that's what it does. Like
it's very impressive. It's very impressive. It's very
very impressive. It is impressive,
right? But it's not really this.
Well, I don't know what
if you
to tell
want,
you.
But it's a matter.
It's a philosophical debate, I'm sure. But in my opinion, and in obviously other people's opinions, it was indeed. That's the definition. So it might only be able to do one question, but it was a damn good question. Right. But anyway, the point that he used the epicycle model, and it was all viewed from the Earth. So it was, circle upon circle upon circle. But if you go and look at some of the things, like, for example, the BBC had one called the 2,000-year-old computer. Inside that, it showed, that's the name of the production. But they had an ability, he found that they were able to do, like, to get the wobble of the moon, to do it correctly. He had gears that would switch into different gear modes, like with pins, and so it could do the orbit of the moon correctly with its oblong, goes in and out from the Earth, and he did that down to 5 decimal places with gears. Like, it was just amazing what that thing could do, apparently. So it was brilliant work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they were like, what if I put it, like, because the mathematician was working on it, he was sitting in a plane, he was like, he put in 16 or put in 17 and it didn't work, and he put in 18 and it didn't work, and he goes, maybe if I use a 17.5 gear, which you can't do in real life, but you could do on math. So he typed that in, and lo and behold, it was the perfect number. It was the perfect number, because so what he must have done is he scaled it up and then divided it by 2 with another gear. And it was just, brilliant work there, bud. Brilliant work.
Absolutely.
But it reinforced that whole Earth-centric idea to the cosmos. And on the back there, that's the metrodonic cycle. The 240 months equals 19 years. Those two panels just above there, two up, the small one, the vertical one with the two.
This one?
Yeah, that one. That's the 19-year cycle. So you could, and each one of those would tell you where the eclipse is going to be. So you could basically scroll through all 240 months, and it would repeat. It was just crazy what it could do. And of course,
I wonder where they got the accuracy. I mean, was it just data collection, or was it something else?
You know what? That's a really good question.
Thank you.
I really
What's
don't know.
What's the answer?
Who could tell?
Well,
you?
it shows that somebody had a lot of astronomical and historical knowledge that they were working from.
But when looking at proportion, I mean, this is all the question keeps coming up. And so it's like a lot of times this type of accuracy, it's like you get these proportional realizations that seem profound at some point, but it seems like it's an insight perhaps that's deeper than just our empirical data collection. It maps to this. It maps to this function. You know?
Well, that's true, but what I see is evidence of some institution or the other that kept records over a long period of time.
Yeah. Yes.
It could even be that at that point they had come across Chinese records that they could add to their own or something, because they would know whenever there's a supernova or an eclipse, and so if you have enough tables like that, you can then see the patterns, and the fact that the patterns are very regular is kind of interesting or surprising even.
Well, especially lunar eclipses, apparently they had no problem. But I didn't know any of this. I thought this was apparently those little crosses up there, each one of them represented one of the 4 games: the Nemean Games, the Olympic Games, the Syracuse Games, and so on. So that's why the Olympics are one every 4 years, because it's based off that cycle.
Amazing.
So they. And
this is from Archimedes, or who's this from?
Archimedes made this. He probably made more than one. It was arguable that he had a shop that he was making stuff like this from, and it would take about 30 minutes to make each gear out of brass, and just with a file and everything, and because people had made them, obviously trying to remake them, and you had to stack them in a particular order on this thing, and it was on the pole, and it was like 240 separate gears, all put together to do all the planets, and most of them look very similar. Like the orbits of the planets look very similar. Like you couldn't tell the moon, or just by looking at them, you couldn't tell if that was Jupiter or Saturn. You couldn't tell exactly where it was. Until and then once you realized it was Saturn, because it was attached to the Saturn thing, and it was 7 or 8 rings around each other, and each one moved at a different speed. And it could tell you exactly where to look. If you put it, facing north, it would tell you where to look in the sky to find Saturn, where it would look the sky to find, Jupiter or whatever. And it would always be right.
Mm-hmm.
And that must have been amazing for being able to predict, because obviously eclipses freaked people out. I mean, the whole all of Troy, I think, had to do with an eclipse, and there's some examples of people who have tried to imitate it.
Yeah,
it wasn't very big. All that information got to be shoved into one little box, which is pretty cool. Got to give him. I mean, I really think that if it wasn't destroyed, and the Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed, could you imagine how far advanced we'd be? If we could have stopped the Roman Catholic Church from being formed, imagine where we would be now.
Well, there's an argument that Caesar did it, and then the
Archimedes' pump. That's another good one right there.
Yeah.
Anyways,
excuse me. Caracalla was classic for going into Alexandria because they were. It was a true multicultural city, you know, and with the grand the library, right, which ultimately came out of Ptolemy, you know, but they were also like into theater, etc. And the Roman emperor at the time, it was known quietly that he killed his brother and was really a jerk. So they would make parodies of him, right, and ridicule him in Alexandria.
I can see why they didn't like him then.
He decided to pay them a visit because all this ridicule was bubbling up out of Alexandria, and
the educated people were the educated elites.
They were right, but they were also, you know, like playing Saturday Night Live on the emperor, you know.
Well, nothing wrong with that. He obviously deserved it because he was obviously, look what he did.
Right. So he came to visit. He set up a royal visit, you know, who came in on the ships. They greeted him with red carpets, etc. Right. And he said, I want to see all the males between to greet me, as far as a, you know, part of the fanfare, to greet me at the shore side, right? All between you know, young males up to 25, right? And there was about 20,000 of them. Right? He came in and with his legions slaughtered all of them.
And you wonder why the empire fell.
Yeah. But there's tyranny, right? And by the way, someone's ego got bruised a little bit.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. This is when a republic has fallen to that kind of hubris. But there's in the lower, I guess the lower left is the boat thing, the boat grabber.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
that's very nice.
Awesome. Yeah.
How to make your day
suck. But I mean, a lot of the ways that these inventors, etc. I mean, this is where their paycheck came from military and you know, these type of in order to have power, you have the biggest, as usual, the biggest gun and the biggest, you know, the exotic thing, you know. So Da Vinci was, you know, employed quite a bit in that regard, right?
Could you imagine his being inside his first tank with 2 oxen driving it, and you're just sitting on top of an oxen going, shoot a bow, surrounded by a big wooden umbrella? Yeah. Sorry, some of this stuff.
So oxen sinking boats. That's good.
Yeah, I like the idea.
Yeah.
Oxen are pretty powerful.
Yeah.
They're like 2 horsepower. There's the other one that grabs it from the front. I like that. Grabs it from the front and pushes the ship underwater.
Nice.
I think he had one that reached out and dropped big stones on the boats too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're doing what they can with what they got, right?
Brutal.
Well, come on. It's only good when people try to attack you. So it's not exactly like, you know. Speaking of interesting.
Then they have like an Archimedes death ray where they had all the mirrors or something, the lenses.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're talking right there.
Yeah.
With death ray, that was legendary.
Similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would point out at it would reflect the light of the sun, and it would light the sails on fire.
Well, was that big thing that they had? I think it was Alexandria, right? It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The lighthouse.
Lighthouse at Rhodes.
Yeah.
Well, no, Alexandria.
Was it Alex? I think it was Alexandria, actually.
I thought it was Rhodes. Maybe I'm wrong.
Are they close?
R8.
No, the Rhodes is in the Eastern Mediterranean. And
I thought it was
Alexandria's. Well, I think maybe they're not that far.
Yeah.
But the one at Alexandria had a big statue.
That was the one. It was the wonder of the world was the one in Alexandria.
Yeah, this is the one. Yeah.
Well, I guess I was wrong. I'll now have to look up the one on the the lighthouse of Rhodes, and why do I know that one now?
I think the one at Rhodes, there's one where they had it where it's a huge statue. That might be the one you're referring to.
Oh, the Colossus of Rhodes.
Colossus of Rhodes. Thank you. That's exactly what it was. All right. Thank you. Now my brain will deal with that. But yeah, the argument is that the lighthouse was made with an arc light.
Okay.
No, well, that was one of the things. It was so bright. That's what made it amazing. It wasn't just lighting a fire. It had apparently powered by an arc of electricity. So the argument goes. This is long before I heard of the EU. So, but I could.
Now, how would they have generated that voltage? I wonder.
Well, that's what I mean. Is how much technology did they have? How much did we lose? One of the things that I was honestly thinking about is thinking about the internet as Alexandria. Okay, and what will we say when a Carrington event comes over and wipes it all off? It's gone. And would that be worse than the entirety of Alexandria burning back then? We lost the internet completely. Not just the internet. All knowledge that was stored in digital form.
What about electrical power and electrical devices?
Well, I've heard arguments for electrical devices all the way up until the 1700s.
No, what's your scenario? Would it be just internet, or would it be that washing machines stopped working too and things like that?
Well, if according to my understanding of the situation, if the real weakness that we have in our power grid is the substations. See, the big power sources probably would be repairable in relatively short order, relatively, because there's only a few of them, so that you could take parts and get the nuclear reactor back up and running, take a few parts, get the whatever back up and running. But there's only a reserve of maybe a worldwide reserve of those giant substations that we have around the country. They fail so infrequently that we only need the manufacturer to make maybe no more than 5 to 10 per year. Okay, and they ship them around the world from Germany or wherever they're made. But they have a big flaw, is that they cannot take a positive voltage going up their ground. So if a positive voltage goes up through the ground, it will really screw the whole thing right up. And it will be down. And to repair that is impossible, more or less. You have to build a new one. And since we only have, let's say, 5 to 10 spares, you would lose thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of these substations around the world. So, although we could generate the power, we could never distribute it.
Yeah, but the impact, I think we'd have about 2 weeks to absolute chaos, and then 95%.
Actually,
well, I'm not sure what your causative scenario was, but there's this thing called an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, which would come from, say, exploding a certain kind of nuclear device way up in the stratosphere.
Oh, that would do it too. Yeah.
But the effect of that, there's actually a book called 2 Seconds After, and so basically all electronics are burned out. Okay. Computers, stereos, power grids are the least of it. And the first thing that would happen is every plane would fall out of the sky. Every airliner would then crash and burn. Hospitals would their generators the power would be out and their generators wouldn't work. The consequences, communities would be isolated. You didn't have radios and telephones. So
right.
It's a really
it's a mass
devastating scenario.
Mass extinction. Ultimately.
You just don't have the bootstrap. You can't build a modern computer without using sophisticated computers to build them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
right.
We wouldn't know where to go back to the hoe and the plow.
This is where
really old people would become very important.
It's a Samson option ultimately, which is often touted. I've heard this mentioned, and it's like that's a real serious threat that could happen.
It's almost, in some ways, it's worse than, say, just one or two cities got nuked. Okay, well, that's bad stuff. But I mean, that's not the same as this civilization is totally coming to a halt. And no way, vehicles don't run. I mean, food deliveries. I mean, it's just amazingly bad.
Yeah, when you say food deliveries, that's the one of my brain dead jobs made me aware of just how critical it. I worked in a grocery store, and it was one of the most backwards grocery stores. It was one of the last ones to switch over to internet ordering.
Mm-hmm.
And we still did it over the phone for a whole grocery store, but they finally got caught up with the times. But what happened in the beginning when they did that, they had a couple days where their internet wasn't working, and the whole grocery store emptied out except for the slowest selling, nonsense. And that was just one store. And then the only way they solved that is to go send a truck over to another grocery store and rate. I mean, you couldn't do that though if all the stores were on the same thing. And
you're talking about just regular turnover. If there was a panic involved,
right? Just regular turnover where people could go to another store. The store that I was working at was effectively empty in 2 days. I mean, all the water was gone, all the meat was gone, and it was just the slowest move. Some odd, weird flavored curry sauce was still on the shelf. But
so that was quite a lesson in reality.
Yeah, I mean, just how fast that you can't even get the logistics of people's food and water supply now is. So it goes downhill really fast.
There's actually a show about this
called
refrigeration.
What, Heather?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying in refrigeration, even talking about the lack of refrigeration. It would last for that long, but without refrigeration, it would be even less.
They have scenarios in this book I was mentioning 2 seconds after that. Cattle farms and hog farms and stuff. But they didn't have any way to get their stuff anywhere. Just wasted. Meanwhile, everybody's starving. So
anyway, there is definitely a show, or I don't think it lasted long because it was so dark when you think about it. But it was called Revolution, and they basically all the planes fell out of the sky, that type of thing, just like you were describing. The only difference is, and this was the big difference in that show compared to what would be in real life, is that things stopped working. No EM could work. They had some sort of dampening field that was keeping electromagnetism from functioning. The right-hand rule would not occur. So you could not make electricity at all, even if you made something spin. You couldn't just hook up the magnets and get her going. And I thought that was an interesting take, because obviously we're pretty smart. We'd start generating, anyone who has who has a water source nearby could start generating power just by, putting alternators and sticking them on, certain things. Repairing an alternator is not impossible, if you know what I mean. Just so salvage one and start getting it working. You get wild AC, and then with a few diodes, you could have DC, and you could power some batteries, and yada yada yada. But it's not. But you're like, it wouldn't be something you would know. I mean, you'd have to know that already. You couldn't look it up anymore. You'd have to have a book or something if you didn't know.
Yeah. So actually, that book gives you really the same scenario as the EMP thing, only they give it a slightly different dynamic.
Right. But it's just to give you an interesting story. But but you're right. The devastation. I was just thinking about it like, if a Carrington event occurred and positive voltage occurred across the planet, was induced, our substations could not take that. They would fry. They can't take a backward current, and by that nature, we'd have to repair them, and only a few people know how, and there's just simply not enough of them around, spares. Because if one exploded, just exploded, we just order it from wherever and readjust the power grid around that spot to try to get power to the affected zones. And then we replace the one that blew up, put a new one in there after it got shipped from, Italy or whatever, and then we put it in there, and then away she's running. But and then we sort everything out and get it all sorted out with regards to our, bypass it and put it back on the grid, and that would be it. But to lose them all,
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine if the ancient world had some sort of interesting power grid and they lost it all, which I think is, in my opinion, what some of these pyramids and such, stelae and other things may have represented way back when, and you could see pyramids with their outer casing blown off in all directions. They probably suffered some major spike, if you know what I mean. They could not compensate. That's tragic, whatever picture that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good. I mean, this is Dave Talbot's most recent piece, and it's interesting. He talks about archetypes as always, but it's the apocalyptic nature that is this common thread between all these different cultures, and it's kind of very interesting. We're talking about that with our society now, where this is the threat, but that apocalyptic pattern, how it relates to all these different, any of these cultures that grew to some prominence. There's both sides of it too. They generally have a pretty strong creation story, but there's also this apocalyptic end.
And God
they
came and
go
knocked them
together.
down. Yeah,
they go together.
Yeah,
and the interesting thing about the creation story is that it's not about because I mean, of course, it's different in Genesis, but I mean the old archetypes aren't about creation of man or animals or anything. So it's just about the creation of night and day, and bringing the world to its end, and Venus becoming a distant object and all that. So it's different than Genesis, a different kind of creation story. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, but it's interesting though. They have the universal. They each one attributes as a universal creation story and a universal apocalypse.
Right.
So, anyway, and then if you extrapolate this to the first thing we were talking about is is this actually just talking about the birth and death of the individual, and the as above so below stuff that Bruno was talking about, etc. So he kind of points in that direction. So
that was a beautiful example of dual technology right there. That pyramid that you just showed. I'm not sure what that was. Is it just up ahead here? Or was it in here? I don't know. I don't know where it was.
Or is it just above? Is it just above there?
There it is.
That's a capstone.
That's an example of possibly two different pieces of technology. The ones who made the stone, very nice and smooth, and of course the ones who carved into it later.
Do you know it's later?
Well, no, on this particular one, I do not. I will be honest, but there are those bull chambers in the bottom of it's supposed to be giant bull sarcophagi, I guess, where they held these royal bulls or something after they died. But you can see the carving on them is pathetic compared to the beautiful sheen of the mirror-like finish of the work, and the fact that one of them was damaged, it had a crack on it, right? So they seem to scuff or try to polish that part that was broken off and still carved on top of it. The broken part. So that seems to indicate.
Well, that's similar. That's similar to some places I think we've actually looked at here, where you have an ancient stonework, that's, and then sort of rubble has been put on top of it.
Yeah, Machu
make
Picchu,
it into a new
Cusco.
Yeah, that kind of
thing.
Kind of thing. Yeah. So that definitely happens. And
the Temple of Baalbek, another perfect example, where the Romans
that's the argument for the Sphinx too, right?
Yes, in a way.
The head.
The head is very
there's an argument that it was either a lion or a jackal beforehand.
Love that idea. And of course, some of the things are amazing. Like some of the things they found, those giant, almost gear-like looking pieces of quartz. We could never carve something like that today. Way too big, way too friggin' big, and beautiful too, in a gear shape. Like how would you make why out of the hardest stone, like actual, pink quartz? Like it's just.
No, they had to have a technology. There's just
and a reason
we don't.
Right. Yep. I mean, the pyramids certainly to point that direction that it was some type of power, kind of system, and then the fact that we go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say that I heard one place that the local folk mythology is that it had to do with sound. The priest would make a certain sound, and the stone would rise up or whatever, and presumably then it would be a certain kind of sound could crack the, scratch the granite, and then you can make it crack along that or something. So I'm not saying that
as a resonance.
I'm saying it's sound, but I mean, that is what has been passed down through generations, and so some kind of technology that we don't have a clue about at this point. Closest thing we'd have, I guess, would be
John Reed,
giant lasers or something that could cut stone. But
John Reed, who's the cymatics expert with cymoscope, etc., went into the Great Pyramid, and there's that they call it there's a resonant cavity right in the center of the king's chamber, and he was given permission to put basically like a rubber he got to patch the corner of it and put a rubber cap over top of the thing in order to see how it resonated. And he's got a whole discussion on that. It's pretty interesting. But he was looking at.
Can you relate that?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
That actually doesn't surprise me. Number one, the word Senefer means two-tone, and that's the bent pyramid. So it generated two different tones, like a B and a D, and you get a C tone from the Great Pyramid. And you wonder if that if that actually played into the nature of of how it worked.
And there's two possibilities. Just following up on what you're saying. One is that you generate a sound inside the chamber and it has some effect. Okay. Another possibility is that it's tuned to a certain frequency that, say, is going to be generated by a certain kind of thunderstorm or something. And so it captures the energy of some external event through resonance. And then that has some effect. So I just want to throw out those two possibilities.
No, you're on the same ballpark. I went a little bit different. I was thinking, see, these things freak me out.
He's going interesting direction.
But no, I was thinking that it had to do with sort of like Michael Tellinger said, if you kickstart it, if you can just get it started with a note, with a tone, it can begin to do its work. So you just give it a kickstart, and then at the beginning, and this whole resonance begins to fluctuate and keep self-reinforcing itself because, like you said, they're riding a waveform that they're trying to capture.
Well, that's like Tesla that had to turn off a machine almost on an emergency basis because it was going to either shake the whole building apart or shake the whole world apart. Something that he was